Welcome everyone to the second session of our Safer Mobility Conclave from all of us at Autocar Professional. Now, the topic for this panel is the roadmap for safer vehicles in India. Improving road safety, as we know, it's been a constant journey, and quite frankly, it's really amazing how far India has come on this journey. I mean, I think it's even as little as 5 years ago, we had cars, very frankly, which were quite genuine death traps, but they've been weeded out with more and more stringent regulations. But of course, a vehicle is never safe enough, and the endeavor should be to keep increasing levels of safety, be it active, passive, or even from a road engineering perspective, or from a more holistic point of view as well. And a lot of this comes at a cost. Affordability is always the biggest hurdle, and especially in India, where affordability is so crucial, and of course the overall driving environment in India as well. But anyway, to discuss all this and the future roadmap for safer mobility, we have a very eminent panel, and I'd just like to quickly introduce my panelists before we get started. So we have with us Mr. V Mannikar, who's has more than 35 years of automotive R&D experience. He's presently the Deputy Director of ARAI and the head of the Passive Safety Lab. So clearly, a very crucial panelist over here. We have also joining us from South America is Alejandro Furas. He's the Secretary General of Global NCAP. He's been an FI Foundation member and a Global NCAP delegation member at the WP29 UN Geneva since 2011. And we're all aware of NCAP's role in pushing the safety boundaries. From the Mr. Furas, really thanks. I know it's the middle of the night for you, so really appreciate you being on this panel. From the OEM side, we have Mr. SJR Kutty from Tata Motors. Now, Mr. Kutty, he's had 34 years of experience and is currently the head of vehicle attributes and technical services at ERC. He's also responsible for the crash safety team that developed India's first 5-star rated G NCAP car. From the supplier side, we have Ravindra Kharul, who's the president and CTO at Endurance Technology. He too has over 30 years of experience and has published 26 SAE papers and has 16 patents applied in his name. And we have Sagar Apte, who is the founder and CEO of CarIQ, and he's had a rich and varied experience of 20 years in product management and marketing. He started CarIQ, which is now part of Varroc. He started in 2013. To build India's first connected car platform. Obviously, connectivity plays a big role in safety too. So thank you everyone for joining us. And I would like to start with Mr. Mannikar, who has a presentation for us and will set the context for today's discussion. Mr. Mannikar, over to you.
Yeah, just would like to share my screen. Please tell me once it is visible to you.
Yeah. Not yet.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Homes.
Mannikar, your screen is not yet visible to us, so I
shared the screen once more.
I don't know whether
Is it visible now?
No, unfortunately
then
not.
Maybe because when I am using share screen here, it is not sharing. I have sent it to you also, the presentation to Mr.
Okay, Nasir, who's our tech in charge, maybe Nasir, can you just take this over, please, Nasir?
Yeah. Just send me the PPT.
I can do it from my end.
Okay,
yeah.
Please do
it. Because it is not allowing me to share right now.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Just give me a second. Yes.
Nonetheless, good afternoon to everybody and good afternoon to the viewers by the time we set in.
Yeah, there we go.
I wish everybody safe time, be it from home, or also I welcome all my fellow panelists, known faces, Alexander and Mr. Kutty and all others. So I may be providing my quickly the perspective of test agency point of view, or please don't take it I am wearing any government cap, more of a test agency perspective. Is it possible now? Is it
Yes.
Is it being shared?
Yeah, we can see the screen, and I think the first.
Yeah. So we'll move on. So I am talking, say that we are all working for a common goal to reduce the fatalities on the road and have a safe transport. So safe vehicle, if you really look into the 5 pillars, we are basically concentrating on safer vehicle pillar, even though it is a multi-sectoral phenomenon, improving the vehicle safety. We have heard the fellow panelists earlier also, a lot of expert views from OEs and also from technology perspective. I will like to unfold here the Indian safety roadmap, how it came and how it started in every practically 5-year window, if you really look into. Um, Initially, we were concentrating more on having safety critical components which are certified to be put on a vehicle. Next was the installation also has to be qualified. Next 5 years, it was more the push on alignment of the standard with the European regulation. And we started realizing truck and bus safety is equally important and COP of the safety critical component. That was the next step. Then when we went to the bus code, truck code, trailer code in the next series, and then we realized that ABS is for the hazardous good was talked about and implemented. Then the next 5-year window, which is 15-20, ABS for 2-wheeler and 4-wheeler was mandated. As we know that we are on Indian accident statistics, we are killing more people outside the vehicle. It means that vulnerable road users are the major victims. So crash worthiness for the passenger car was also talked, pedestrian safety was talked, EV and HEV. Apart from the impact of the global harmonization started showing up. If we really look into, I have in this slide tried to explain how the various passive safety things advented in India, typically from safety belt in very early year where we started fitting the safety belt, but what is safety belt was not defined for India. And then we had the side door intrusions regulation, but at that time, vehicles without side doors were also permitted. And from that era, we had moved on to occupant safety era. We have started putting underrun protection devices. We have started looking into interior fittings. And we understood for the first time that how important it is to have dashboard energy absorbent and also not to have any sharp objects in our head impact zone. And as a society, we started understanding occupant safety in a bigger way and try to prevent also care for the colliding partner safety by underrun devices. Then we actually went into the raising the bar to the crash regulations and offset frontal, side collision, or pedestrian safety. Actually, as a India, we have done a great deal of job in the harmonization. If you look at the slide for the harmonization, we see that in India, we have almost technically aligned 114 plus standards and a few standards, barring few standards, which are the subjects which are under deliberation, mainly looking into the advanced systems like lane departure warning, advanced emergency braking, accident emergency calls, and driver assistance system for a very particular reason, because they are dependent on the infrastructure to be ready. So we had a very valid reason how once the infrastructure for these are ready, we will be able to get into it. What is pushing our safety roadmap in Indian context, like anywhere? International agreements and global harmonization, again, government policies and judiciary interventions, consumer awareness, penetration of the new technologies and affordable technologies, roadmap for the transport infrastructure building, availability of the road accident data, maybe consumer awareness I already talked. So we have got into the complex of the standard by raising the bar. Practically every vehicle, passenger car on Indian roads is not only crash worthy, but also pedestrian friendly thanks to the quick implementation of Pan India across the model implementation of the crash worthiness, which has really opened us that if we really look that what we said in a decade of action in 2011 to 20 as India would do, you will see most of the things we have already covered. The major standards where we share that ensure all motor vehicles are equipped with the and meet the regulation of safety belts, safety belt anchorages, offset frontal crashes, side impact, and application of pedestrian regulation. Yes, only part which is still waiting in our list is implementation of NCAP, what we call a Bharat New Car Assessment Program, which is the scheme is ready. We have to go beyond the regulation, but the stage is set now. Minimum safety is achieved by implementing the crash regulations, and it's just right time to achieve this. If we go to the next slide, we will see that in passenger car segment, we have a lot of new initiatives done. Lot was, I will not repeat into that, but one of the worries we always had that we had a safety belts, but people are not wearing. For those who want to wear, reminders are already there if they are forgetting it, but if they have decided not to wear it, then we can't expect technology to discipline a person. So something which is much beyond. So a society change in the attitude of the society and the user is absolutely required. Then the manual override for the central locking system was one of the important feature in India required. The rear parking assist implementation of the crash standard I have already talked about. We'll be quickly summarizing on that. I also try to explain the holistic approach here to bring down the fatality. Remarkably, we have a very good example of Sweden. I'm not saying that we can transfer the template by copy paste, but the spirit of holistic approach is something which is I am advocating. It means the safe vehicle, safe road, and safe user. Apart from that, the safe speed. Everything is safe only at a particular speed. We must understand what are those conditions in a given ecosystem where pedestrians are exposed, where two-wheelers are exposed, where on a highways. So together, if we have to have a safe ecosystem, we must have, apart from the safe vehicle, safe roads, safe disciplined user, safe speed appropriate for the conditions, together only achieve. In summary, I am saying that while we implement the safety regulation as per the roadmap, which will be a continuous process which will demand minimum safety, and in India, we are quite ahead in this aspect. The safety initiative like Indian NCAP will also help to commence the consumer to demand safety beyond regulations. Of course, this has to come with the affordable technologies. New safety will act as an enabler for improving improving the road safety scenario in India. Accident data, which is currently getting into collected into pockets, if integrated into a national database, will serve a bigger objective.
Thank you, Mr. Mannikar. That was really very interesting. You've given us the entire history, the road, the journey of safety in India. And, what was really interesting to see is how quickly we have really come to harmonizing global standards. But clearly a lot more has to be done. And as you said, there are multiple elements to it. A whole ecosystem needs to be created. There's no one silver bullet, as has been said before. So clearly, I think a lot of work to be done in multiple areas. India is very, very unique in its in the conditions over here, and that's one of the reasons why we have such a high fatality rate on roads. I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Alejandro Furas. Alejandro, firstly, a big thank you. Really appreciate you joining us. What time is it over there, by the way?
It's 3:43 in the morning.
Oh my God. Wow. Well, I don't know if I can send you my coffee, but I hope you're having one. So, but
it's okay. I should be in Germany right now, but due to the obvious circumstances of the COVID, I'm still sitting in Latin America, so waiting for the vaccination.
Right.
And that's the reason why. But it's okay. Actually, I'm more or less adjusted to the European time, so it's almost okay. So thank you very much.
Hope you're safe and hope you get the vaccination soon, as do I. Hope all of us get it, and we come out of this terrible situation. So just hope everyone is safe. Well, right now we are talking about safety, but a different kind of safety. And Alejandro, global NCAP or NCAP, you've done a lot to push safety beyond the minimum level of safety standards. I think that's really been your push. It sometimes might have got a little controversial with manufacturers, but I think that clearly the goal is there to make cars as safe as possible and create an awareness on them. So, but just looking at it from your point of view, clearly what we understand global NCAP is on a certain, right now it's more in the region of passive safety. I think even whilst your tests do not include certain active features as yet, I think ESC and all might come in. So just wanted to get your sense going forward. I'm sure you will also be ramping up your protocols, making them a little bit more stringent. We've had a good first start with frontal offset and side impact, and just going forward, how do you see let's say from your perspective the safety improving as we go along?
Probably India is one of the quickest development in terms of safer vehicles, probably in the last 7 years, according to our view. And I'll give you some background on this statements. At first, as you know, the NCAPs are actually considered into the UN strategy for the decade of action. As you probably remember, under the safer vehicle pillar, there's a first recommendation. It's going on regulation. The second one is having NCAPs. And it's probably not big news for any of you. But when we are comparing certain markets to the markets, like, for example, Latin America or India, we compare them to what we have in Australia or what we have been seeing in Europe in terms of developing improvements in road safety. And sometimes there is a false idea, or I would say partial idea, that only with regulations the market will change. Only with regulations on vehicle safety, then things are going to go like Europe or like Australia. And I'm sure you're aware of, we have a 5-pillar strategy in the UN Decade of Action, which says that all the 5 pillars need to be developed and evolved. And that means that only with vehicle safety, of course, we cannot solve the issue, but the pillar 3, the vehicle safety, is one of the pillars that have been least developed in most of the less developed countries. So having said that, there is a clear, let's say, point of view that in those markets, when we're talking back to the example, we're talking about Europe, talking about Australia, we say, oh, how well are doing those countries? And we're saying with regulations, we're going to be like them in terms of vehicle safety. That's not completely true, and I'll tell you why. If you take a look at European market, for example, and you take a look at the Australian market as well, you will see that most of the cars on the roads are 4- and 5-star cars. And those 4- and 5-star requirements on Euro NCAP or Australian NCAP, for example, are way beyond governmental regulations, as you know, and as it was actually said by Mr. Mannikar. So having said that, if we want to look like those countries in terms of vehicle safety improvements, and we want to have the same results, at least in the vehicle pillar, we need to not only have regulations, but also aim to have a 4- and 5-star fleet on the road. Only regulations will not make it. We need to push the markets in the direction of 4 and 5 stars. That's actually the main task, or the main job, or the hard work we have from the NCAP perspective. So having said that, we're going to dive into what we have done in Global NCAP. So what you have on the screen is sort of a mapping of the top 30 markets in the world. Top 30 markets in the world, more or less counting for, at least from 2019 data, we're counting for almost 67 million cars a year, when globally, the global production of cars that year was 68.7 million cars. So having said that, is that if we somehow improve this top 30 markets, we're going to be switching or improving in terms of global road safety. We're going to make it a huge contribution to improving road safety in general in the world. We're not saying that the rest of the countries are not relevant, but just to give you an impression of, there are many top, or I would say one of the largest markets among the top 30 that still have very low regulations, or let's say low amount of regulations in terms of vehicle safety and motorcycle as well. So you can see it on the screen with the different coloring and different cars, different colors referring to each one of the regulations. One of them is referring to the NCAP and also the motorcycle ABS and regulation 78 as well. You can see that there are some key countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, one of the top 30 markets, and they are pretty much, I would say, unregulated, if you want to put it in a way. Having said that, most of you know what Global NCAP has been doing in India, and it's, as I said at the beginning, it's probably one of the most dramatic jumps ahead or improvements in short period of time in new markets. We have seen them in India since we started testing in 2014. So we have an image there from the Tata Nano we tested 2013, 2014, all the way into the Nexon and Ultras, latest 5-star cars from Tata as well. And you have seen also below the different improvements, especially starting with the Quid and how we're going to improve the car in a few months, and then the brief summary story of what Mahindra could do, starting with the Scorpio we tested first around the 2016, and then what is the latest 5-star XUV 300. So having said that, it's Indian industry has shown the muscles they have, how fast they can improve, and how good they can take and shift the safety of their vehicles. We have also improved from Global NCAP. We have pushed for improvements in other markets as well. ASEAN NCAP is another market that I'm sure you're aware of or you know about. We started testing and supporting them back in 2012. So we are ahead of the 10th anniversary of ASEAN NCAP as well, with great success. As you mentioned, there are new technologies ahead of us, and new technologies that we understand, the ADAS technologies in general, that we understand are very relevant and will definitely bring a benefit to the road safety scenario. However, in our opinion, we're still far away. It's not just our opinion. Basically, it's based on IHS marked assessment. And we're still quite far away in time until we see a certain penetration in the market of these technologies, at least in these 3 different markets I'm showing in the screen, where we're going to be able to assess dramatic improvements and dramatic benefits towards road safety. But as we always say, you need to start somewhere. We also are confronted quite frequently with the position of some governments that apparently do not want to invest that much time in terms of improving vehicle safety, or they don't want to spend so much energy in vehicle safety, because they say that autonomous cars are around the corner. Autonomous cars, when they're in our markets, they're going to sort out all the problem. And basically what we understand they're doing is just pushing the problem ahead of, just kicking the ball forward for a few years, and probably putting the problem on the table of the next government, so the next people in the office. The real thing is that fully autonomous cars and a safe system itself was still far away in time, but ahead of that, we need to build up certain technologies to become more popular and more in the use of the consumers on one side, and also the improvements in the infrastructure that are actually very much needed to have these technologies working efficiently on the road. So it's hard to say, it's hard to think about a fully autonomous car working in a road where the signaling is not developed properly, marking is not there, and basically when the car cannot communicate with the road around. So both things need to be developed. We need to make the consumer more and more aware of the technologies, more and more familiarized with the technologies, and at the same time you need the development in the infrastructure. So if governments sometimes are talking about the silver bullet of autonomous cars, first thing I would ask them is, are you doing what you need to do in your infrastructure to make those cars feasible, or those technologies feasible in your markets? And probably sometimes the reply is no. So there's on this point is this position, we're not blaming the infrastructure for not developing. It's not the right thing to do. Both things need to be developed together clearly, But from the perspective of the NCAPs, there are many technologies like, for example, autonomous emergency braking systems, which have tremendous benefits. And those, in many cases, do not need road marking. And we're talking about an advanced technology. A little bit of a side story is what could have been achieved in Latin America is to promote and actually push for its availability in the markets. And this is a critical thing, because in Latin America, for example, we have fitment rates for technologies like AB systems, which are between 10 to 30% at the latest in the last stage of the protocol. That's having said that manufacturers can score points if the fitment rate is as low as 10% in the full production. That's a very low volume. But as I say, the goal is to make these technologies available for the consumers. So the consumers start to be aware of it, start to choose these technologies. And we have seen in Brazil a dramatic change and shift on consumers actually being willing to pay for AB technologies as an extra, because they see it as a comfort thing rather than a safety thing. But it doesn't matter. We have popular models, which nowadays in Brazil are 50% in volume, at least, equipped with these technologies based on ACC technologies, and more leaded by comfort rather than safety. So having said that, there's not too much extra I would like to say, but clearly we have roads. These images are from Latin America, but they're not far away from what we can see in India, where we have problems in markings on the roads, and also certain pedestrians or certain road users not respecting certain signals, and probably the infrastructure is not prepared to prevent vulnerable road users going on certain high-speed roads. And these are the things which we should address in those systems, which are probably a little bit different from what Euro NCAP, Australia, or the US have been seeing in their own markets. So having said that, this is the end of my presentation. So I went a little bit longer than expected. I will shift back to my camera. And if you have any questions or whatever, let's just let us know, and we can address those very, very quickly and very easily.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alejandro. That was very interesting. I'm sure we'll have questions which we'll take at the end of the session. But clearly, it's very fascinating, and it's good to know that which I didn't know, that India has probably has been very quick in increasing its level of safety. You said over the last 7 years we've done a good job. That's good to know. Also, good to know that active safety is going to be playing more of a role in your protocols going forward, including essential stuff like AEB, ESC, of course, will definitely come. So I think clearly, preventing the crash is probably possibly the most important thing. And I'd like to turn to Mr. Kutty, which is a good follow on from Alejandro's presentation, because you've worked closely with NCAP in achieving 5-star ratings. And, even as a mass manufacturer, to achieve this level of passive safety, no mean achievement. It seems that, the highest standards of safety can be democratized. It isn't just the purview of the most expensive cars. So just wanted your, I'd like you to kick this off and, going forward, will we be seeing more active safety features in your cars? Obviously, if you want to retain those star ratings, I'm sure they will have to be introduced. Right now, I know there's not too much in there other than ABS, which is mandatory. So your thoughts on your roadmap forward?
Yes. Before I start, just give me a minute.
Sure. Alejandro, while we wait for Kutty to come back, just one quick question is, when can we expect these protocols? You said 2022 is when ESC will definitely come. Is that right?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I'm sure that Mr. Kutty is very familiar with that question. The industry has been asking us.
Right.
As you probably know, Latin NCAP also been confronted with the same things, but the COVID crisis pushed us to delay the protocols a little bit. Okay. In Latin America, at least, as we were already in 2020, we couldn't push them forwards, but we have extended the life of the protocols for 1 year in Latin America. In India, what we have done, it's basically, we were expecting to have those protocols up and running on 2021, and clearly we have pushed those ahead at least 1 year. We are finalizing discussions on how far in time we're going to be able to push the protocols. But it's very likely that 2022, we already see those. In terms of publication, we expect them to be I mean, for sure, open for all the manufacturers and published already no later than a month from now, at the latest.
Right. Okay, great. So,
over to you. Yeah. Sorry for that brief interlude, actually. Thomas, your question is very relevant. But before I get to that answer, let me just tell you this trade-off between attributes and the price decision is not just very critical for the OEM, it's very critical for the customer. So when the customer goes to the showroom and he has to make a buying decision, he needs to know exactly where he's putting his money. Does he buy a safe car or a good-looking car or a combination thereof, or does he want a car which is great NVH or fuel economy or so? These are buying decisions that are normally associated with the mature market. But what happens in a mature market, there are certain things that are taken as standard and as a given, that most products are safe by itself. Unfortunately, in our country, this norms of safety is getting better and better, but it's not something which was until recently figuring out as a very important parameter in this buying decision. Things are changing though. Now, safety is holistic and needs to go beyond just wearing seat belts or using safety gear, etc. It is actually it's a mind game. And, thinking about safety, and as you get into the car, knowing that, I have to complete my journey safely for myself and for the pedestrians and for a vulnerable road users is primary. So more than having all these technologies in the car, if I were to be asked what is primary, especially in a market like India, is this concept of, what is safety? And that, I have people waiting for me, loved ones waiting for me at home. And there are people on the road who also have loved ones waiting for them at home. So this concept of, safety, which is missing in India, but is slowly coming on, is actually changing the paradigm for automakers, ourselves. Now, in Tata Motors, we've been looking beyond business interests in coming out with safe solutions. Why? Because way back in 1998, where safety was not even talked of in this country, our great chairman, Mr. Tata, even established, this whole safety laboratory, spent money in simulation solutions, etc. And today we are actually benefiting from those decisions taken nearly 25, 30 years.
Yeah, I think you all were the first to have a crash lab.
Yeah, absolutely. And then comes GNCAP. GNCAP, and this is very important for us to realize that if you try to suddenly take a country which is not used to safety and then suddenly put them into a degree of difficulty which is so huge, then you will suddenly find there are no adopters. So this is like a computer game. In the gaming industry, you have difficulty levels. So you first encourage people to attempt the first level of difficulty, then the second, then the third. And when they graduate into those levels of difficulty, then you're drawing them into playing this game. Same with safety. So suppose, we've been having this conversation with the GNCAP colleagues. Alex is always part of our team. And we always ask ourselves, putting too much where the cognitive loads are going up and asking OEMs and customers to deal with a level of safety consciousness which they are not used to, probably is designing for failure. So what did we do? We said, okay, let's deal with the regulations first, but go beyond regulations, adopt certain protocols like what GNCAP has done, and graduate ourselves on the learning curve and our customers into that. You asked a specific question about active technologies. Now, active technologies are very important, but between passive, active, and all this is the human mind who is sitting actually at the steering wheel. Now, having this gentleman, whoever is driving, or a lady who is driving, having that safety culture embedded in his mind is actually priority, because as you saw in Alex's slide, there are a large number of technologies that you can have which is relevant for a particular market, a particular country, based on accident research. We have to not just cut and paste, as Mr. Mannikar said. Pick those relevant technologies which are absolutely useful looking at our accident data, so that the cost of the product, the graduation of our people in the learning curve of safety, all goes well. And finally, in time to come, we have a safe community working with safe cars on the road and off the road. So this is my short answer to your question, that active technologies have a place, passive technologies have a place, and the human mind has its place. And interaction and a triangulation between all three is vital for a vibrant and a safe culture, especially in our country.
Right.
I don't know if I've answered your specific question, Humas.
No, you have absolutely. And while I don't want to take away from the great work you all have done, and really, as I said, with having cars which are so good in crash, it's generally democratized safety to a great extent. But just to press you a little bit more on active safety, and that's when I want to even turn then to these from the supplier side, is on active safety. I mean, in terms of prioritization, there are some things which don't even cost much. For example, honestly, I think what MORTH did with a speed limiter warning for 120 kph, it's really annoying. I mean, I personally hate it, but I would imagine something like that does a huge benefit in terms of reducing, potential accidents, because speed is the #1 killer. We all know that. Another thing which is quite simple, and I want to put this to all the OEMs. Why don't you all have rear seatbelt warning buzzers? It's so simple. I mean, no one wears a seatbelt at the back. I mean, all of your safety features then in a way become redundant. And I want to come to this later, and even to you, Alex, because these don't really cost much at all.
So absolutely true. There are some technologies which are cheaper, some technologies that don't cost at all, and some which are very expensive. A graduated implementation is a very important first step in all safety. But in this safety industry, there are two specific concepts that we all are very familiar with. Which are those? One is the fitment rate that we just heard Alex speak about. But there is also a question of adoption rate. So you have this the strange situation that you provide all these technologies only to find that the people on the road are finding ways and means of subverting these technologies. That's what Mr. Mannikar also said. If the technology can be provided, but in India, you will find very often that some of the drivers, especially in public vehicles, they would have the seatbelt already engaged with the male-female engagement is done into the buckle, but he is not belted. The belt is he is actually resting on the belt. So you have all sorts of things, and this is fundamentally coming from the belief that all these are nuisances and never seen as some aids. So automakers are always confronted with this fundamental question: how much to give versus how much will really be accepted and adopted. Now the problem is these cost money, and if you don't do this correct balance of trade-off between cost and adoption and fitment rate, you will find that you're giving things which nobody is using. It becomes a nuisance, and then people are trying to find ways and means of avoiding using those safety systems. Therefore, I come back to this fundamental premise that this is a long-term game. Safety is not something that you're going to just do today and then shut off tomorrow. It's a long-term game. It's a cross. Sometimes you cross-subsidize, you teach, you learn. So the environment being ready is as important as the automakers being ready. So giving something which is hugely expensive, not getting adopted, versus something that you're taking people along that curve is great. And that is why we really like GNCAP's approach, that India may not be ready for those addition of safety assist technologies immediately. But gradually, probably in 2025, 2026, when the market is now ready, you get all this inside. And then you can also have classes of vehicles with different levels of safety assist technology where customers can choose from. But the best way is to have standard cars, which have got the minimum level of safety. And then you can actually keep on adding to this as you go. Right. So this is the approach, and this is exactly why we, adopted the GNCAP protocols in our development. But mind you, getting the passive safety right is the starting point before we really get to active. So you can't get all these active technologies and say, now my car is passive, is just okay, that the car can crash whichever way it does. So it's a graduated scale, and we are moving in that direction of taking not only the company, the customers, the road users in the graduated learning curve and increasing the difficulty levels so that in 10, 12 years time, we harmonize across the world with those safety necessity things which integrate all of this. So that's a graduated approach. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. No, a fair point, Mr. Kutty. And, I just want to turn to Mr. Kharul, because looking at the other side, endurance, as we know, supplies a lot to the...
Kharul is an old friend. So yeah. I'm really looking forward to hear him too.
Yeah. Clearly, from the two-wheeler side, I think it's all about active safety, isn't it?
As you rightly said that yes, two-wheelers is say more quite important also, especially from the Indian scenario, the kind of numbers what we have on the road and all, and that's why the safety is quite crucial, and it is really indeed a good move by a government that when ABS was become say made mandatory, or CBS was made mandatory on any two-wheeler going on the road, and that to me is really a crucial say step in terms of safety of road, because to me I think it's a myth that ABS is more important only in the high speeds and all, but it's not really so. The way we configure ABS, it is very important even in the slow speeds on the slippery roads and all. Another thing important is that say two-wheeler by its nature is not a stable vehicle. So rider while driving makes it stable by his own riding skills under the speed. So while doing so, anything that disturbs this thing has a big impact on the even the other vehicles like follow vehicles and all. So when this is introduced, it is not only safety of two-wheelers, but many times in the road accidents, you would have seen that two-wheelers get involved into four-wheelers also. And then many times when the four-wheeler is driving, suddenly the two-wheeler comes in because of its instability. So in such cases, this particular move is going to be quite helpful. And what we are seeing is that though it is certainly a cost to the two-wheeler, and India being very cost-sensitive market, it was very high. So even then, the last 2 years when we are seeing, I think people are appreciating now the ABS presence in two-wheelers. And what we are seeing is that due to that, even low-end vehicles below 125cc, where it is not really mandatory to have CBS, I will not be surprised if some of the OEMs come up with ABS for low CC also to give that as an added feature for safety, because customers will start appreciating it now. And going forward, I think ABS was just the first step. As we move forward, there are a lot of technology likely to come for even two-wheeler industry also, especially like ADAS feature like AEB, automated emergency braking, uh, should be coming up anytime as such, as well as motorcycle stability control, the way we call ESC in four-wheelers. MSC is also quite important aspect for two-wheelers. So some of these things are going to come. Of course, the challenge is making the cost, because cost, especially for two-wheeler, the cost increase just due to ABS was itself quite substantial. And when we start adding more and more features, it's going to be concern. But we need to strike a balance. It is always like who is going to go first as such.
Right. No, absolutely. I think, as you rightly said, cost is a big issue with two-wheelers. It's such a price-sensitive sector. Obviously, I think largely it would have to be driven by regulation. I don't know how many manufacturers will voluntarily offer this, and I'll come to the regulation and the government side of it later. But our final panelist, Mr. Apte, clearly connected car tech plays a key role. Obviously, things like geofencing, speed, obviously even the fifth pillar, which they talked about, the emergency SOS services. So, obviously, this is also a very key and crucial element of the overall holistic approach to safety. Please, Mr.
Yeah, so absolutely. And I think Alan also mentioned the e-call facility that's available in Europe. And we have a similar standard AS 140 in India, which is being implemented for commercial vehicles or passenger carrying commercial vehicles at the moment. It would be a good idea to look at connected technologies for a couple of things. Like Mr. Kutty mentioned, you graduate the users into a better understanding of safety. Connected technologies can help educate and give a personalized experience for a vehicle owner, be it two-wheeler or four-wheeler, to kind of start improving their driving behavior and probably expose them or make them understand the risks that they are taking by a certain driving behavior, right? And that data can actually fuel a lot of decisions by the government agencies. Like we have this whole AS 140 and SOS buttons now, but have you identified red zones, accident-prone zones? And is there an ambulance service within a few kilometers of those, or at least a primary health center within a few kilometers of those red zones and accident zones will be critical, right? And I think technologies like this will help kind of get there faster rather than later.
Right. But what about the cost element of it? I mean, that's what, one needs to talk about. I think Mr. Kharul also, especially, on the two-wheeler side, obviously, and in four-wheelers, the delta cost is much less compared to the overall cost of the car. So is cost going to be playing a crucial role in this?
I personally think it requires a little bit of change of view for an OEM in India, and it's changed a lot in the US and European markets, where connected technologies are seen as revenue generators and not necessarily a cost, right? Because in India, OEMs don't have as much play in the aftermarket services, right? There is no revenue optimization or revenue generation because of a connected solution. But in fact, if you really think about it, a connected vehicle can get serviced better and faster in real time compared to other technologies, right? So you can use that to actually do a revenue generation. And most studies have shown that you can actually earn money by having a connected vehicle on the ground. We need to stop thinking of it as a cost and start looking at it as an opportunity and a business case to sponsor this, and that probably might change the attitude towards having it. And then the additional benefits of safety and convenience always almost seep into the vehicle.
Right. Thanks. So, actually, we are running tight on time, but I just want to, with all the panelists, we've heard everyone. I just want to discuss or get your thoughts on, let's say, the government's role in safety regulations, because it's very clear that safety is a cost. Very few manufacturers go up above and beyond, and we've seen Tata Motors do that with a 5-star rating, going beyond the minimum level of safety. So the question is, what should the government be doing to enhance the minimum level of safety? And Mr. Mannikar, I'd like to come back to you for this, because obviously you work very closely on the regulations. And
certainly, as a matter of fact, when we were contemplating in 2014 itself with even global NCAP together with government, whether it is the right time to introduce the NCAP instrument along with the regulation. But then it was wisely taken a decision that minimum safety across the board is the first priority. You can't be increasing safety on a handful of vehicle and expect to have miracles on the road in terms of reducing fatality. Having said that, priority was set right, and it was a mammoth task to have every damn vehicle M1 class built on a road has to be crash worthy, and having also a constraint that we need a mobility. I mean, safe mobility is yes required, but we require first a mobility to move from A to B. If you don't give, people will find their own innovative ways to jeopardize and circumvent safety and still do it. So having a big deficit in mass transportation is another issue. So we have to address that. But as a government, yes, we said that for airbag, for example, there was a lot of resistance initially that nowhere in the Europe we have a mandatory airbag, because the education level is so high that consumer will automatically prefer a car with a good number of airbags. But India, if person doesn't understand what is using sometimes, so in that case, it was necessary to introduce a passenger airbag, driver airbag as a mandatory feature. Once it is there, people understood it. Sometimes a passive safety, as a fellow panelist also told, that people don't understand the cost what is invested for himself for an emergency situation, which could be a life and death situation. So sometimes the realization of that cost, small incremental cost, will come with only education and sensitivity to the subject. And discipline also, I heard from my German friends also, it took for them a generation almost to change the attitude. I mean, sons are more disciplined than the father in terms of a safety belt. Today also it is seen there. So India is no difference. Another one aspect I would like to give, it is worldwide we had seen that typically with the GDP increasing, initially the fatality started increasing everywhere in the world, whether it is Japan, Europe, Germany, US. over a period of time, people, the infrastructure improved, and then people became little bit improved infrastructure also recklessly. People started using it, and then they fallen into discipline, and then it started going down. Perhaps we are on an increasing path. If we are able to hold and try to bring it down, is a mammoth effort for us. But nonetheless, we have to do our part of it, and net result will be cost benefit will be transferred to the society. It is a little longer answer, but I thought that it should be a little wholesome so that sub questions also can be answered if any.
No, you're right. Very interesting. And, as you rightly said, many countries have initially tried to dodge safety. I think, I don't know which European country it was, I'm not sure, so I don't want to take the name, but they had what they call these safety belt t-shirts, where they just had a safety belt printed on their t-shirt. So it would fool the regulator, the police or whatever, and they didn't have to wear their safety belt, but it just gave the impression of people wearing a safety belt. So absolutely, it happens all over. Alejandro, turning to you again, I think Mr. Mannikar raised a very valid point that, in India, people are not as educated and they don't buy into the basic safety features which they do in Europe. So that's why things like mandatory airbag, which is not there elsewhere, is kind of made compulsory over here. I think possibly a great step. But from a government's point of view, do you think the pace of increasing safety should be faster? Are you happy with the trajectory? Because of course there's a cost issue, and I think, as you rightly said, you just can't load that cost absolutely immediately into a very cost-sensitive market. So just wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Good. I love your question. In order to answer that, I think the best way to do it is with examples and what happens in other markets. As you probably know, from the 9 NCAPs around the world, there is only one that doesn't have any government involvement, and this is Latin NCAP. All the rest have governments involved, and all of them have governments inside the NCAPs because they understand that it's the way to push the markets. They understand that there's a way to catalyze the market. And 2 very quick examples. One is, if you go to Europe, back to 2015, it is exactly when the ESC started to become mandatory by law, by regulation. Yeah? Before that, it wasn't mandatory. However, vast majority of cars already had electronic stability control since at least 10 years before that, and without being mandatory. Why was that? Because manufacturers knew that if they wouldn't bring the ESC as a standard, then probably Euro NCAP rating would be really bad. But the same example is with the side head protection system, with a curtain airbag, what we usually know as a curtain airbag. That was mandatory by regulation 2019. However, a lot of cars, probably I would say vast majority of cars in the last 10 years before that, at least since probably 2010, 2009, or even before that, they did have the side curtain airbag as a standard, as a voluntary decision. Why? Because otherwise it would get rated actually the poor result in Euro NCAP. So it's actually, as I said at the beginning, Euro NCAP does have on the board probably the 5 most important governments in Europe in terms of auto industry. So from one side, the government is trying to bring the regulation on board. This is something you put at time, which is sometimes way too far away ahead of you in time. But at the same time, you have an NCAP, which is the one promoting safety, promoting voluntary changes, and also informing consumers in order to make consumers change. There is something else interesting in all this. Some people think that it's because of consumers that manufacturers are changing the preferences. They say, oh, I'm going to buy a safer car because there are more people that are going to buy my car. And then you get to the question about how educated is your consumer. And there's a lot of that has been done by the government itself. So there's one part of the government which is more into road safety. And this is the agency that it's in more interest that people are more trained, better educated, and therefore preference for higher safety. And on the other side, you have the part of the government which is the one into regulation. Those parts sometimes belong to different ministries. And the idea of them is not to fight into each other, but just to play in the role in their own courts, what they can do. Regulation can bring regulation with certain timing, which is sometimes aligned with the industry request. And the other one is the one educating consumer and trying to catalyze the market and accelerate the market. That's how it worked. So what should happen, if you have a certain time X for regulation, the NCAP, the local, the Tata NCAP, should go faster. And it's not against the industry. It's not bashing the industry at all. It's basically setting like the carrot and the stick. So if you don't go fast enough, there's a stick. If you can go fast enough and catch the carrot. So that's how it worked in the whole world. None of the changes that we have seen around the world came just by regulation. You need to have both systems on the ground. And some one little more detail. When you have things becoming massive, there is a scale of the market itself that brings the cost down. I give you an example. Is any manufacturer charging for the tires in the car? No, because you say, oh, if you pay extra, you get tires in the car. No, because everyone is getting tires. Is it mandatory? No, well, it's not mandatory, but you don't think about selling a car without tires. This is something a little bit more into the industry. The last sentence, the last comment. Some manufacturers do not do this because of the preference of the consumers. They do this because what we call sometimes corporate embarrassment. It's probably a nice way to say it. Some manufacturers do not want to be touched or connected to a poor result in the star rating. So what they do whatever it takes to prevent having the wrong brand next to a 0-star or 1-star or 2-star, whatever. So they have standards. They have internal standards. And you have examples like Toyota, or you have examples like Volkswagen globally, but they have a standard that whatever the car they bring into the market, it should not be below a 4-star level anywhere. It's not written, but you see in the attitude. You go to NCAPs worldwide and tell me where you can find a Toyota or a Volkswagen with less than 4 stars. It doesn't exist. So they have their own standards, which are not written. And this is an extra value or an added value they give to the consumers. And that's how they build up the corporate image. That's how most things work. Voluntary, the carrot is what it makes the market change. Do not expect the things to change in India just because of regulation. You need to have both. And it's well proven worldwide.
Right. Thanks, Alejandro. That leads me straight to Mr. Kutty, because clearly talking about your carrot and stick approach, I think Tata Motors has voluntarily gone in for what is perceived as a very safe car. And Mr. Kutty, just want to touch upon a few things over there. Again, the topic initially was on government regulation. That's a minimum level of safety. But obviously, I can imagine it's good business looking at your sales right now to go above and beyond. So just your thoughts on that. Let's say, customer perception, the cost factor, is it that much, or is it now that you're doing things on a certain scale that, the cost comes? Certainly, obviously, in terms of crash and all, there would be a certain cost, material cost. So just, as a manufacturer who's, let's say, taken the carrot rather than the stick, as your thoughts on that.
For us, actually, in the Tata Group, it was never carrot, never stick. It was more carrot rather than stick, but it's not even carrot. Let me tell you why I'm coming from this. Because it was about fundamentals of, what are we in this business for? We live and die for the customer, or we should. There's many things more to be done, but we are defined by our customer. And as a responsible automaker, we have to take responsibility for dishing out products which are good for the customer. Whether the customer rewards us or not is a separate issue, but we need to do this. So there is a philosophical justification of why we are doing what we want. Now, regulations have moved. And when we as a responsible automaker are defining that, listen, that we have to do more than what we can do and give the Indian customer what a luxury guy is able to afford at a cost which is affordable, then we are talking business. The important thing I want to tell you is, if you are to design passive systems right from the design stage, the cuckoo is giving trouble, I understand.
He's also resonating with what you're saying. So it's a lovely natural sound. So please don't worry about it.
So I stay in the Tata colony, which is full of.
No, it's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was saying is, if you really want to graduate, you have to start somewhere. And when we designed in these safety solutions from the day one, the cost is something that we could manage. The management had told us when we started this journey that you please design in systems in such a way that the cost of safety does not exceed the cost of a lunch in a good hotel for a family of 4. So typically what happens, a person or a family gets his car, and then on the way home, they go probably either to a temple or probably to a church or to a mosque, wherever they are. And then they have lunch. And if there are 4 or 5 of them who are having lunch in a good place and those going to cost about whatever it costs, then we know that, if they are prepared to pay for the lunch, which is probably one meal, that is the same amount of money that probably they have to put into the safety of a car, which is probably for a lifetime. This is where the conversation started. And I want to tell you with certainty, the teams in engineering, manufacturing, sourcing, we did not, disappoint the management. we deliver to the management what we want.
Right.
So it's not only good social sense, it's good economic sense too. So Tata Nexon or Tata Altroz being a car is not a Tata Motors success story. It's the success of this country, thankfully supported by the entire ecosystem of which GNCAP, ARAI, component manufacturers, sourcing people, manufacturing and design has all played its part. Thank you. If that helps.
Thanks, Mr. Kutty. Thanks so much. And I think a lot of people will resonate with that, especially the lovely bird outside your window. Turning to again, the supplier side, Mr. Kharul, turning to you again from a government regulation point of view, especially in cost-sensitive segments like two-wheelers. Do you think that is fundamentally the way?
Especially as I said again, two-wheeler being very cost-conscious market. Over a period, you would have seen that most of the safety and environmental related improvements have happened through regulations,
right,
making it mandatory. And that is mainly because the kind of percentage of cost it adds on the vehicle cost is much higher as compared to in four-wheelers. Because for four-wheeler ABS versus two-wheeler ABS, cost difference might be not much, but the basic cost of the vehicles is very high. So as a result, when it is percentage, it is very high. Second thing is that two-wheeler for India is a commodity, not a luxury. People need it for their day-to-day working, going to the work, going for or doing some small business, whatever it is. So as a result, everything costs to that. So what we have seen is that generally regulations become the main starter point where it has to. Now the question comes is like once it is mandatory, now when you have to put ABS, now when ABS cost is already put on the vehicle, if I add a little more feature on that and make it more improvised version of ABS, then it doesn't add that cost, but it adds good value to the customer. And I think today we are exactly into that phase when ABS is mandatory, but you can compare that the ABS, what is required as per the law is just a base level of feature. Whereas what we offer, or you can see people offering also in the market, are much more than what it is required.
And customers are seeing value in this. That's what you're saying.
Yes, yes. So we start looking at adding more value, more features for the similar cost that has increased, so that customers start realizing the better or more benefits of that. So now today also when ABS is in the market, but ABS, the way it gets approved by even OEMs is not based on what only it meets the standard or not, but we go beyond that. What are the features we are giving? So as I said earlier also, I won't be surprised if some OEMs get into the market with less than 125cc where it is not mandatory to have ABS, but they introduce ABS as a feature. It is something similar to what today ABS, say drum brakes are there on small end vehicles, but few vehicles get sold with disc brakes also, at least 10% of that. So that is how there will be a journey, but bottom line remains regulation becomes mandatory to start the safety roadmap,
right?
Because of the cost nature.
Right. And turning to you, Mr. Apte, clearly connected features today are in a way a luxury. It's a selling point, a lot of it. Do you think at some point it needs to be made mandatory purely from a safety point of view, like an e-call system, which, has been talked about, which is the last bill. I'm sure at some point it will be, I don't know, maybe in something like dash cams in terms of, figuring out what the, reasons for accidents or crashes are from an insurance point of view. There's so many features which actually should be mandatory and really don't cost that much going forward with the advantage of scale and prices of these components coming down.
No, absolutely. I think we are already getting towards that, right? We already started making e-call kind of system mandatory for certain class of vehicles. So making it mandatory for other vehicles is definitely on the horizon. And as technology is progressing, the cost of these devices are also dropping drastically, right? In fact, before e-call was announced in Europe, these average price of these devices used to be somewhere around $150, right? But post e-call in Europe, just because of the mass application of these devices, the cost suddenly dropped down to $70, almost by 50%, because the whole European continent decided to make this e-call as a mandatory system. So as as it becomes mandatory, the cost also actually lower over a period of time. So it's just a matter of time before this becomes mandatory. And insurance companies will continue and try to influence government agencies to bring this in, because today there are knock-to-knock arrangements. There is no need to even get an FIR for a personal accident, right? You can just go back and claim. And insurance companies are already reeling under losses. So economically, it seems like the right way to go forward for everyone.
Right. Well, we've absolutely run out of time, but I think we have time for one question. And I think I'm going to combine the question because it's actually a very relevant question, which a lot are asking is, we've talked about technologies, we've talked about road engineering, we've talked about active safety, passive safety. But what we've not talked about is the driver or the rider, which actually is the root cause of the accidents. And the root cause even goes back to be honest, a very poor driver training process, or even the way we get our licenses. So, I mean, what can we do about that? Because it all starts with the driver.
I had seen a very good example existing in India for imparting training to the driver. This is a Volvo Driver Training Center, which wonderful training is imparted. It is just not only having a license adequate, but your habits, your culture you build, possibly incidences that you create. Once they are sure that the faults that you do, which could be a vulnerable thing for a driver, they give the marks on that. And unless you they eliminate this bad habit, they will not certify you. And it is a refresher course.
Yes, but Mr. Mannikar, that's not a legal requirement. I mean, your basic.
That's not a legal requirement, but it is, since it is a mammoth task, since we need so many drivers, so participation only by few agencies will not help, because ultimately if a good product is there, safe product is there, and a bad driver is there, ultimately the image of a brand also gets eroded, because if it was in a wrong steering, a wrong hand. So I would encourage that here the responsibility can be shared by multiple stakeholders, including OEs. But yes, I do agree that we had been missing a very important aspect which you brought to our notice, that a good driver, this country is deficient of a good driver. It is officially recorded in all government records everywhere. You can vouch for it, but the easy way to train good driver is not simple, but it has to be there.
What you're suggesting, and I'm going to throw a really radical thought over here, is that to get good driver training, you have to, it has to be private. I mean, you're going to another agency, which is a private agency. So, even privatizing the licensing procedure, I don't know whether that would help. Never been done really, but it's something where you just open to the private sector.
Country is quite close to it. It looks that country is quite close to it. It is my judgment. It's my personal opinion. It is not necessarily ARAI opinion or anything like that.
Right. So, Alejandro, this is a completely different domain. Of course, you deal with the entire ecosystem, but you can't embed a blind spot detection warning in a driver's head. But clearly this is, especially in a country like India, and I think that's really the root cause of it.
For this, I mean, as I mentioned in one of my presentations, part of my presentation is that the driver training is important. It's one of the pillars. But from the vision and experience of countries like Sweden, they have understood that the solution of the problem is connecting cars and roads. And probably technologically speaking, for India and most developing countries in Latin America as well, we are far away from that in terms of time. So in the meantime, you have to introduce, I would say, certain things that you can do on a driver's side. But there is a part of responsibility for all sections of the society. One way to say it is, if you give a driver a car which is going much faster, accelerating much faster than in the past, and you don't offer together with that in the car systems, like, for example, electronic stability control, even the best driver from Europe, you sit them in this car and they will crash probably if you're making a turn at a certain speed. So when it comes to offering it, not just the training to the driver, but also the tools that the driver has from the technological perspective on driving the car properly, that's one part of the responsibility, and this is beyond regulation. There is, for some manufacturers, they will never, ever sell a car without ESC nowadays. It doesn't fit in the policy of the manufacturer. An electronic stability control box, when you have ABS on the car, the cost of it is $60 or less. The box of an electronic stability control. Electronic stability control saves almost as many lives as seatbelts. And this is a technology that even if you're a driver which is not well trained, well, it can save you. But back to the training. I think more than training, which is a challenge in many ways. We are confronted with younger drivers now. They are using the cell phone. They don't want to drive. I mean, they are more concerned about having a proper cell phone to hire the car that will take them from A to B. That's so right. Driving is not such a centered activity that it used to be. For example, when I got my driving license many years ago. So along with training, there is something else that has been quite successful in many countries, and it's the penalties. And the penalties, sometimes the politicians see this as a very unpopular, but that's the way to go. I mean, if you take, I'll give a very good example. A Finnish driver, Finland, one of the almost the same level as Sweden in terms of driving education. You took that person, and it's a real case, many real cases. They came to Uruguay. There was actually a large Finnish plant producing paper, and they came to Uruguay, and we have 2 or 3 cases of these high managers, from Finnish managers, with drunk driving. They kill people. Would they dare to drive the cars under the influence of alcohol back in Sweden, in Finland? No. Why? Penalties are very high. But in Uruguay, that wouldn't be a problem, for example. So penalties, it's something that comes very, tied along with the question about training and road user behavior. Proper penalties, proportional to the wealth and the capacity of that person, even if it's unpopular, that's one way to solve the problem. And it's more immediate than training. Training takes a long time. It changes the education. It takes generations. I've been hearing about that in Latin America for the last 30 years, and nothing has changed.
Right. So thanks. Well, Mr. Kutty, Alejandro talked of enforcement. Yes, we understand, and also the fact that you've got electronic nannies now to kind of compensate for skills. But again, I'll put it to you very plainly, as a responsible OEM, what about having proper driver training?
I'll answer this. It's actually a very emotive topic, especially in the Tata Group, because driver training has got 2 aspects. One is shortage of good drivers. Especially, it will be very strange for the whole, the world of people who listen to us, that we are 1.3 billion strong and there is a shortage of drivers. This just doesn't go together. And I want to tell you that the Tata Group, not today, but almost 10 years ago, have started associations with large number of STUs across the country to associate in driver training. So we have driver training associations in the Northeast, in Delhi, in Chandigarh, in Punjab, where most of the drivers come in, especially for commercial vehicles. At the passenger car levels, we have some tie-ups with, local schools, but not as effective as some of the other OEMs do, which is a fact. But more than driver training, I want to actually deal with a very important topic. See, it is normally said, the best technologies are inferior to probably an ordinary mind. Let me tell you why I'm saying this. So since you're in Maharashtra, and if you go across Maharashtra, you would find many places you will see a very, very ordinary looking signboard which says Manavar brake, Uttam brake. You would have probably noticed it. And it is basically meant for ST drivers, state transport STU drivers, who actually are requested that keep control on your mind. So what this roughly translates, Alex, is that if you are able to control your mind, that is the best form of your brake. So why I'm saying this is, you see, all of us are good drivers. Almost nobody can beat you at driving. That's a separate issue. But most of us are good drivers on this call. And we all take risks in various forms. And despite all the technologies available, we tend to see that there's no cop and there's no red light and we want to probably just move across. Or we sometimes, if it's a short path, we want to drive on the wrong side of the road. Or we'll probably overfill the car. Or we'll probably not drive with the seat belt on. We take all those risks. Now, what is the solution to this? The solution is, to keep reminding ourselves, however good you are as a driver, however competent you are technically, however good you are as a good driver, it is important to place great emphasis on your mind. So what is the rule that we normally say? Whenever you start your journey, before you start your journey, as you wave your goodbyes to your family who have come to the gate to see you off. Hang on, stop, tell yourself and tell the people in the car that's going to be a safe journey. This reminder every 2 hours in the journey is more than sufficient to remind you that you have safety comes first. If all of us were to implement the small, very small thing, it's called a 30-second rule, or it can be a 2-minute rule. If you just were to implement this, this probably will replace the need for extremely high-end intelligent technologies, because the human mind has got tremendous amount of energy to energize you towards good, safe driving practices.
I think it all starts with the driver, and maybe even his ability to want to use some of these features, a mindset.
So no, you're absolutely right. I think driver training comes first, and at least in India, getting a driver license, it is cheap, and it is also a very non-standard form, right? So especially when you're getting a learner's license, they ask you a set of 10 questions, which answers almost everybody knows even before they go to the test.
I know how I got my license and my driving test. It was a joke, but anyway.
When you're getting your permanent license, there is no standardization on how that test is to be conducted. What are the specific things that you need to know? Are you following those rules? And that's where the whole thing starts, right? You're not even trained, and the cost of license test is, I don't know. I mean, when I took it was like 20 rupees, but now it should probably be 200 rupees or 300, but hardly anything, right? So even if it does not matter, you hardly fail these tests anyways, right? So two things are needed. First is the entry point itself needs to become more stringent with a better set of rules and regulations on how these tests are conducted. And since I am from a connected car world, for me, the constant monitoring of your driving behavior and then bringing in that reaffirmation of your driving style and mode has to be done from time to time.
You can have a virtual electronic teacher as you go along with connected tech.
It's already there. You just need to kind of pull it in. Yeah.